A lady rummages through the trash with delicate gestures, unaware that she is about to be recognized. The man in the suit observing her is her son, a millionaire businessman who believed he had protected her. But upon discovering the truth, he realizes he abandoned the one who loved him most, and nothing would ever be the same. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. The city of London awoke under a grey sky that March morning. Traffic was already bustling on Canary Wharf as thousands of people rushed to their appointments, each carrying their dreams, their urgencies, their entire lives within bags and backpacks. Among them were those who had already conquered everything urban life could offer. Richard Adams was one of those men. At 42 years old, Richard commanded one of the country's most promising technology companies. Adams Tech had started as a small project in the back of a rented garage in the East End and now occupied 3 floors of a mirrored building in Mayfair. Business magazines featured his face on their covers, calling him a visionary, an example of overcoming adversity. And he truly was. The son of a domestic worker, raised without a father, Richard had built his empire with his own hands, studying at night while working during the day, saving every penny to invest in his dreams. That morning he was sitting in his executive office, facing the enormous glass windows that overlooked the city. The decor was modern, minimalist, with designer furniture and a shelf filled with awards and certificates. On the mahogany desk, in addition to the ultra-thin laptop and 2 cell phones, there was a single silver-framed photograph. In it, a thin boy, perhaps 10 years old, smiled beside a middle-aged woman, both in front of a simple brick house. It was him and Mrs. Louise, his mother, on the day she managed to buy the small house where they lived as tenants. Richard picked up the photo frame and ran his thumb over the surface, as he always did when he needed to make difficult decisions. Mrs. Louise, the woman who woke at 4 in the morning to iron clothes before leaving for work. The woman who saved coins in biscuit tins to buy his school notebooks. The woman who never let there be a lack of food on the table, even if it meant she herself would eat less. Now, at 73 years old, Mrs. Louise lived a completely different reality. Richard had bought a spacious apartment for her in an upscale neighborhood, hired a housekeeper who cooked her favorite meals, and ensured she had everything she needed. But something had been bothering Richard lately, and this annoyance had a name and a surname: Michelle Brennan. Michelle was his image consultant, hired 2 years prior when the company began. To gain international prominence, elegant, articulate, with an MBA in marketing and an enviable network of contacts, she had transformed Richard from a successful businessman into a corporate celebrity. She organized his lectures, chose his clothes, coached his posture for interviews, and managed every detail of his public image. And she was efficient, very efficient. The office door opened after a soft knock. Michelle entered with her characteristic confident gait, high heels marking the rhythm on the wooden floor. She wore an impeccable grey pantsuit and carried a tablet under her arm. "Richard, we need to talk about Thursday's event. The American Chamber of Commerce has confirmed your presence as the keynote speaker. It will be broadcast live to over 50 countries." Richard nodded, still holding the photo frame. "Great. What theme did they define?" "Overcoming adversity and social responsibility. Exactly what you excel at." Michelle paused, her eyes fixing on the photograph in Richard's hands. "But we need to talk about another matter." She approached, placing the tablet on the table and crossing her arms. "Your mother, Richard." He looked up, surprised. "What about my mother?" Michelle sighed as if she were about to deliver delicate news to someone who didn't want to hear it. "Look, I know it's a sensitive subject, but you hired me precisely to be honest with you, and the truth is, her presence at public events is starting to compromise your image." Richard felt a pang in his chest. He placed the photo frame back on the table with more force than he intended. "Compromise my image? Michelle, you're talking about the woman who raised me alone, who worked her whole life so I could study. I know that, and that's exactly why your story is so inspiring. But Richard, think with me." Michelle pulled up a chair and sat down, leaning slightly forward. At the last charity event, your mother appeared in that simple floral dress, speaking softly, clearly feeling uncomfortable in the environment. The photos circulated on social media, and the comments were complicated. What kind of comments? Michelle unlocked the tablet and showed him some screenshots. Richard read in silence. There was everything. Some commented that her outfit was inappropriate for an event of that level. Others mocked her shy demeanor. There were even those who questioned whether that was truly his mother or just an older lady he'd brought along, to enhance his image as a humble man. Richard felt anger rise in his throat, but Michelle continued before he could respond. I'm not saying I agree with these comments, quite the opposite. But we live in a world where perception is reality. You're about to close multi-million-dollar international deals. Foreign investors will judge every detail. And unfortunately, Richard, your mother conveys an image of, how can I say, of a past that might be better kept private, at least for now. Richard pushed his chair back and stood up, walking to the window. Below, the city continued its frantic rush. Millions of people fighting for their place in the sun. How many of them sacrificed their principles every day in the name of success? How many hid their origins, were ashamed of their families, betrayed their values for a promotion, a contract, and applause? She is my mother, Michelle. I won't hide her as if she were a source of shame. Michelle stood up too, approaching him with an understanding smile. No one is asking you to do that. I'm just suggesting that you protect your privacy and hers too. Think about it, Richard. She's 73 years old, has high blood pressure, that osteoarthritis in her knees. These events are tiring, stressful. She stands for hours, surrounded by strangers, in noisy environments. Don't you think it would be better for her to have more comfort, more tranquility? Richard turned to face her. And what do you suggest? Michelle took a deep breath, as if she were about to present a solution she had planned long ago. I know a wonderful residence in the Cotswolds. It's a discreet, exclusive place, surrounded by nature. It has a 24-hour medical team, a nutritionist, a physiotherapist, recreational activities. It's practically a resort. Your mother would have all the care she deserves, away from the stress of the city and public exposure. And you would have the peace of mind knowing she's being very well cared for. My mother isn't a child who needs to be institutionalized. It's not institutionalization, Richard. It's care, it's love. It's you ensuring she has the best years of her life in a safe and welcoming environment. She paused, letting the words sink in. And let's be honest, you spend more time traveling than in London. Next week you have that conference in Miami, then you're going to Lisbon, then Dubai. Your mother stays alone in the apartment with the housekeeper watching television. Do you really think that's quality of life for her? Richard looked back at the city outside. Michelle was right on some points. He really did travel a lot. In the last 6 months, he had spent more time on planes and in hotels than at home. When he was in London, his schedule was so tight that he only visited his mother on Sundays, and even then, often had to rush off to deal with some urgency. Mrs. Louise never complained, but he saw the loneliness in her eyes. He saw how she tried to make the visit last longer, offering coffee, biscuits, asking about details of his work just to extend the conversation. Perhaps she really would be better off in a place where there were other people her age, activities, constant attention. Perhaps he was being selfish by keeping her in London, just to have the illusion that he was taking good care of her. How much does this residence cost? Michelle smiled discreetly. She had managed to plant the seed of doubt. The investment is high, but nothing that would compromise your finances. About £30,000 a month, all-inclusive. Medical assistance, special diet, therapeutic activities, all of the best. Richard did the math mentally. It was expensive, but he could afford it. And if it really provided more quality of life for his mother, perhaps it was worth it. I need to think. Of course. Michelle lightly placed her hand on his shoulder, a gesture intended to be supportive, but also carrying a subtle pressure. But don't take too long, Richard. The waiting list for this residence is long. I managed to get a spot because I have contacts there, but it won't be available forever. Over the next few days, Richard immersed himself in work as a way to postpone the decision. Endless meetings, presentations to investors, media interviews. Michelle was always nearby, organizing everything with military precision. And always, at strategic moments, she brought up the subject of the residence. She showed him photos of the place, all carefully selected. Flowering gardens, spacious rooms with mountain views, cozy common rooms, smiling seniors during recreational activities. "Look how beautiful, Richard. Your mother would love this painting studio. She always wanted time for hobbies, didn't she? Or else, this winter, garden is perfect for someone with osteoarthritis. The controlled humidity greatly helps with joints." Until one Thursday night, after an especially exhausting lecture, Richard returned home exhausted. It was almost 11 at night. He had a video conference scheduled for 6 the next morning with a company in Japan. He needed to sleep, but first he called his mother, as he always did when he could. "Hello, son." Mrs. Louise's voice was soft, laden with that countryside accent she had never lost. "Hi, Mum. Are you well?" "All good, thank God. I was just watching that 9 o'clock soap opera. And you, son, did you eat properly?" Richard smiled. No matter how successful he became, to Mrs. Louise he would always be the boy who needed to be reminded to eat. "Yes, I ate, Mum. The company ordered Japanese food for the team." "Ah, these foods you eat nowadays. I remember when you turned up your nose at anything that wasn't rice and beans." They chatted for a few minutes about pleasantries. Mrs. Louise said that the neighbor had a new grandchild, that the supermarket had a sale, that she had made that cornmeal cake he liked so much, and saved a piece for when he visited on Sunday. When they hung up, Richard stared at the phone for a long time. She seemed happy. She seemed well. But was she really? Or was she just used to not complaining, to not being a burden to anyone, as she had done her whole life? On Friday morning, after the video conference, Michelle appeared in his office with a folder of documents. "I got it, Richard. The spot is still available, but I need an answer by Monday." She opened the folder on his desk. "Look, I've already prepared all the contracts. You just need to sign. I'll personally coordinate the entire move, talk to your mother, explain everything to her. You don't need to worry about anything. And you can visit her whenever you want, obviously." Richard leafed through the papers. Everything seemed very well organized. Michelle truly was efficient. There was even a detailed schedule of how Mrs. Louise's adaptation to the new environment would be, with psychological support and everything. "What if my mother doesn't want to go?" "Why wouldn't she want to?" Michelle raised her eyebrows. "Richard, you're going to offer her a wonderful place, with all comfort and security. You'll continue to be the devoted son you've always been, just ensuring an even better quality of life for her. Any mother would be happy with that." She paused strategically. "And think about your schedule. Next week you're going to Miami. You'll be away for a week. Your mother will spend her 74th birthday alone, just with the housekeeper. Do you really want that?" Richard felt the weight of guilt. It was true. His mother's birthday was next Tuesday, and he would be in Miami, closing a contract that had been negotiated for months. He had already tried to reschedule the trip, but it was impossible. American investors had no flexibility in their schedules. "I'll think about it over the weekend." But he already knew what his decision would be. The guilt, the fatigue, Michelle's constant pressure, everything conspired to make him believe he was doing the right thing. On Sunday, when he visited his mother, Richard arrived with flowers and a box of chocolates. Mrs. Louise had prepared a lavish lunch, as she always did when he visited. Chicken stroganoff, his favorite dish as a child, accompanied by white rice and shoestring potatoes. The house smelled of homemade food and fresh coffee. During lunch, Richard observed his mother. She seemed tired. She had deep dark circles under her eyes and her hands trembled slightly when she held her fork. Her osteoarthritis was worsening. She had commented in passing that getting on and off the bus to go to the supermarket was becoming difficult. "Mum, I need to talk to you about something." Mrs. Louise stopped eating and looked at him with her usual expression, a mix of attention and concern. "What is it, son? Did something happen?" Richard took a deep breath. He had mentally rehearsed that conversation several times, but now the words seemed inadequate, insufficient. "You know I travel a lot, right? And I know you're alone here most of the time. That worries me, Mum." "Oh, son. But I'm fine. I have Joanna who comes every day to cook and clean the house. I have the neighbors, I'm fine. I know, but Richard poked at his plate without eating. I found an amazing place in the Cotswolds. It's a residence specializing in caring for seniors. It's not an asylum, no. It's like a resort. It has doctors, nurses, activities, beautiful gardens. You would love it. Mrs. Louise was silent for a moment that seemed eternal. Then she lowered her gaze to her plate. You want to institutionalize me, is that it? No, Mum. It's not institutionalization. Richard held her hand across the table. It's care. It's ensuring you have all the comfort and assistance you deserve, and I can visit whenever I want. But I like living here, son. I know everyone in the building. I go to the corner shop. I talk to Mr. Mario at the newsstand. It's my life. Richard felt his heart tighten, but Michelle's voice echoed in his mind. It was for her own good. It was protection. It was love. Mum, you deserve more than being here alone while I travel the world. You deserve to have company your age, do activities, be truly cared for. And the climate in the Cotswolds is milder. It will be good for your osteoarthritis. Mrs. Louise didn't respond immediately. Her eyes welled up, but she blinked quickly, as she always did, when she didn't want to worry him with her emotions. If that's what you think is best, son. That phrase echoed in Richard's head all week. She hadn't said. She wanted to go. She had only agreed because she thought that was what he wanted, and perhaps it really was for the best. Perhaps he was being a good son by ensuring she had specialized care. On Monday morning, he signed the contracts Michelle had prepared. There were several documents, power of attorney so Michelle could handle everything on his behalf, as he would be traveling, authorization for automatic monthly payments, terms of responsibility. Richard signed everything quickly, trusting his consultant's efficiency. Leave it to me, Richard. I'll take care of everything personally. Your mother will be in excellent hands. Michelle collected the papers with a reassuring smile. On Tuesday, Mrs. Louise's birthday, Richard was in Miami when he received a message from Michelle. Everything's all set here, Richard. Your mother is loving the new place. I sent flowers and a special birthday cake for her. Don't worry about anything. Richard replied with a thank you and tried to call his mother, but the phone went straight to voicemail. He found it odd, but imagined she was in an activity or resting. He tried later, same result. He sent a message asking if everything was okay. The response came from a number he didn't recognize, but registered under the name Greenfields Residence. Good evening, Mr. Adams. This is Nurse Patricia from the residence. Your mother is resting and asked me to let you know she's well. Her phone battery died and we haven't found the charger yet, among the things that came from the move. We'll sort that out tomorrow. She sends a kiss and thanks you for the flowers. Richard felt more at ease. At least she had liked the flowers. At least she was being well cared for. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Richard's routine was too intense to allow frequent visits to the Cotswolds. He sent the money religiously every month, £30,000. Then, at Michelle's suggestion, he increased it to 50, wanting to ensure his mother had access to extra treatments, outings, anything that could make her happier. Michelle sent periodic reports, always positive, always reassuring. Your mother participated in the yoga class today. She's adapting very well. The doctor did the monthly checkup, everything under control. Her blood pressure is stable. She made new friends. Yesterday she participated in a tea party with other residents. Richard kept these messages, as if they were certificates that he was being a good son, even from a distance. He tried to call but rarely managed to speak directly with Mrs. Louise. There was always an explanation. She was sleeping, she was in an activity, she was in physiotherapy. The rare times he managed to speak with her, the conversation was brief and Mrs. Louise seemed tired, different. But Michelle explained that it was normal, that seniors went through adaptation phases, that soon she would be completely integrated into the routine. Meanwhile, Richard's career only grew. He closed the contract in Miami, expanded. Operations to Europe and Asia, opened offices in Lisbon and Singapore, was on the cover of 3 international business magazines, won entrepreneurship awards, and in every lecture, in every interview, he spoke with emotion about his mother. about the simple woman who had raised him alone, who had worked hard to give him opportunities she never had. He spoke about dignity, about not forgetting one's roots, about social responsibility. The audience was always moved, always gave a standing ovation, and Richard sincerely believed every word he said. He loved his mother. He was doing the best for her. He was ensuring she had the best possible care, while he was conquering the world on behalf of both of them. 6 months after Mrs. Louise's move to the Cotswolds, Richard was invited to be the keynote speaker at a charity event in London itself. It was a luxurious gala at the Savoy Hotel, with the presence of businessmen, politicians, artists, and opinion makers. The theme was social responsibility and fighting poverty. Richard accepted immediately. It was a cause that touched his heart. After all, he had come from poverty. He knew what it was like to be in need. Michelle coordinated everything. She chose the perfect suit, rehearsed the speech with him, ensured that every word, every pause, every gesture conveyed the right message. On the night of the event, Richard stepped onto the stage to warm applause. The lights reflected in the crystal chandeliers, and the elegant audience watched him with anticipation. He began his speech talking about his childhood in the East End, about the difficulties, about the mother who never gave up. His voice faltered at the right moments. His eyes shone with genuine emotion when he spoke about dignity and opportunities. He donated £100,000 on the spot to the project that was being launched that night, a professional training program for young people from underprivileged communities. The audience rose in ovation. Richard descended from the stage, surrounded by congratulations, handshakes, requests for selfies. Michelle was radiant beside him, organizing the interactions, ensuring he spoke with the right people, made the important contacts. When he finally managed to leave the hotel, it was past midnight. He was tired but satisfied. It had been a good night. He felt he had truly made a difference. He loosened his tie as he walked to his car in the parking lot. It was then that he saw. In the small alley beside the hotel, near the trash containers, a figure moved slowly. It was an elderly woman, bent with age, wearing tattered and torn clothes. She rummaged through one of the containers with meticulous movements, like someone choosing vegetables at a market. She separated plastic bottles, soda cans, anything she could sell for recycling. Richard was about to continue on his way when something made him stop. It was the way she moved her hands, a specific, delicate gesture that he knew well, the way she tilted her head slightly to the left when she concentrated on something. His heart pounded. It couldn't be, it was impossible. He approached slowly, as if in a dream or a nightmare. With each step, the figure became clearer under the dim lamplight, the disheveled grey hair, the bent back, the calloused and dirty hands. The woman must have sensed his presence, because she turned, and then their eyes met, and Richard Adams' world completely collapsed. It was Mrs. Louise, his mother. Time seemed to freeze. Richard was paralyzed, unable to process what his eyes saw. That fragile, dirty woman, rummaging through trash in the middle of the night, couldn't be his mother. It couldn't be the same Mrs. Louise who was supposed to be in the Cotswolds, in a luxury residence, being cared for by specialized professionals. But it was. The tired eyes that stared at him were the same ones that had cradled him as a child, that cried with joy at his graduation, that shone with pride when he opened his first company. "Mum?" Richard's voice came out as a strangled whisper. Mrs. Louise dropped the plastic bottle she was holding. Her legs gave way and she had to lean on the container to keep from falling. She ran her hand over her face, as if she could erase what was happening, as if she could make that moment less real, less painful. "Richard." Her voice was just a thread, broken by emotion and exhaustion. He ran to her, holding her shoulders with trembling hands. Up close, the situation was even worse. Mrs. Louise's face was emaciated, with sores at the corners of her mouth. The clothes she wore were poorly stitched rags, dirty with mud and smelling of mildew. Her hair, once always neat, was tangled and lifeless, but the worst were her feet. She wore worn rubber flip-flops, and Richard could see blisters and open sores, signs that she walked miles every day. "What happened? What are you doing here? Where's the residents? Where are the caregivers? Richard felt his voice rise, but it wasn't anger, it was pure despair. Mrs. Louise began to cry silently. Tears streamed down her dirty face, carving clean paths through skin marked by time and suffering. Son, I tried to warn you. I tried so many times. Warn me about what? Talk to me, Mum. For God's sake, explain what's happening. She took a deep breath, gathering strength to tell something that clearly hurt her deeply. There was never a luxury residence, Richard. That woman, your consultant, she deceived me. She deceived you. She took me to a horrible place. Richard felt his legs give way. He took off his suit jacket and placed it over his mother's shoulders, who shivered with cold despite the mild night. Let's get out of here. I'll take you to a hospital. We'll sort this out. He tried to guide her to the car, but Mrs. Louise stopped, holding his arm with surprising strength for someone so fragile. Richard, there's a bag there. She pointed behind the container. With the cans I got today. I need them. It's money to buy my blood pressure medicine tomorrow. Richard's heart broke into pieces. He went to get the bag, a worn cloth bag full of crumpled cans and bottles. He carried it to the car along with his mother, and during the entire journey to the nearest hospital, he held her hand as if he feared she might disappear again. In the emergency room of the London clinic, Richard demanded immediate attention. He used his name, his influence, his bank account. Mrs. Louise was quickly examined by a team of doctors. Richard stayed in the waiting room, his impeccable suit now crumpled, his tie tossed carelessly onto the seat beside him. He called Michelle 3 times. All went straight to voicemail. He sent increasingly urgent messages demanding explanations. No response. 2 hours later, a doctor approached. Dr. Helen, according to her badge. She carried a clipboard and her expression was serious. Mr. Adams, your mother is stable at the moment, but her condition is serious. She presents with severe malnutrition, profound anemia, a respiratory infection that is likely pneumonia, in addition to multiple infected wounds on her feet. Her blood pressure is uncontrolled. From the history she told us, she hasn't been taking her medication regularly for months. Richard ran his hands over his face, trying to process each piece of information. How long will she need to be hospitalized? At least 2 weeks, maybe more. We'll need to treat the infections, stabilize her blood pressure, conduct a complete nutritional assessment. The doctor paused. Mr. Adams, may I be frank? Of course. Your mother is in a condition we usually see in people who have been living on the streets for a long time, months at least. She mentioned something about having been abandoned in a shelter and then evicted. Is that true? Richard nodded, unable to speak. The doctor continued. I will notify social services and the police, as is protocol in cases of elder abandonment. We need to understand what happened. I do too. Richard stood up. Can I see her? She's sedated at the moment, but you can stay with her if you wish. The room was private, silent, except for the regular beep of the heart monitors. Mrs. Louise slept connected to IVs and equipment. Someone had washed her face and changed her clothes into hospital gowns. Even so, she seemed so fragile, so small in that large white bed. Richard pulled up a chair and sat beside her, holding her hand carefully so as not to disconnect the sensor wires. He stayed there observing her face, seeing the marks that suffering had left. And then, alone in that sterile room, Richard Adams, the successful businessman, the inspiring speaker, the technology visionary, collapsed in tears. He cried for everything he had allowed to happen. He cried for the blind trust he had placed in Michelle. He cried for the false messages, the lying reports, the months his mother had suffered while he lectured on human dignity in 5-star hotels around the world. He cried because, while he was donating £100,000 to social projects that same night, his own mother was rummaging through trash a few meters away. I'm sorry, Mum, he whispered between sobs. I'm sorry for everything. He spent the entire night there, refusing to leave, even when the nurses suggested he go home to rest. Only when the sun began to rise, bringing the faint morning light through the room's curtains, did Mrs. Louise begin to awaken. She opened her eyes slowly, confused by the environment. When she saw Richard beside her, An expression of relief and fear mixed took over her face. "You're still here?" "I'm not leaving, Mum. I'll never leave you alone again." Mrs. Louise tried to sit up, but Richard gently stopped her. "Stay lying down. You need to recover, and you need to tell me everything that happened. Everything, Mum, from the beginning." And then, with her voice still weak but firm in her determination to be heard, Mrs. Louise began to recount her nightmare. She said that when Michelle appeared at the apartment to pick her up, she had brought two men who introduced themselves as drivers for the residents. They were polite, but hurried. Mrs. Louise barely had time to grab her most important belongings. Michelle said she didn't need to bring much, that there she would have everything new, everything of the best. The journey was long, but not to the Cotswolds. The car headed for the outskirts of South London, further and further away from the upscale neighbourhoods. Mrs. Louise began to find it strange, but Michelle, who was in the front seat, said it was an alternative route to avoid traffic. When they finally stopped, it was in front of an old, poorly maintained building with bars on the windows and a faded sign, St. Vincent's Municipal Shelter. Mrs. Louise questioned it, saying that didn't look like the residence her son had arranged. Michelle smiled, that cold and calculated smile she reserved for moments like that. "Mrs. Louise, there's been a change of plans. This is a very respected public institution. Your son thought it would be better this way, more humble, closer to your roots." "But Richard said it was a private residence, that I would have a private room, that—" "Things have changed," Michelle cut her off, picking up a folder with documents. "Sign here, please. It's just confirmation of entry." Mrs. Louise, functionally illiterate and barely able to sign her own name, made an X where Michelle pointed. She didn't know she was signing a document that declared her as a person without family, without contacts, without resources. The first days in the shelter were shocking. Mrs. Louise shared a dormitory with 17 other women. Rusty bunk beds, thin and stained mattresses, one bathroom for all. The food was scarce and of poor quality. The smell of mold, urine, and cheap disinfectant permeated everything. She tried to call Richard, but her cell phone had been confiscated at the entrance under the pretext that electronic devices were not allowed. She tried to speak with the shelter coordinator, a corpulent woman named Sonia, who looked at her with contempt. "Listen here, Granny. They all say they have important children. They all say there was a mistake, but they're all here because no one else wants them. It's best to accept your situation quickly." Mrs. Louise tried to prove her identity, but all her documents had been left in the apartment. Without an ID card, without a national insurance number, without anything to prove who she was, and even if she had them, who would believe that the mother of a millionaire businessman was abandoned in a public shelter? She spent weeks trying to establish contact with the outside world. She asked to use the shelter's phone, but was always denied. She wrote letters to Richard's company address, but was never sure if they were sent. She tried to ask other residents for help, but everyone was immersed in their own suffering. The shelter was a place of despair. Seniors forgotten by families, by circumstances, or by choice, huddled together in precarious conditions. Many had serious health problems and did not receive adequate treatment. Social workers were overwhelmed. Resources were minimal. Reports of mistreatment were constant but rarely investigated. Mrs. Louise, even in that horrible place, maintained her kindness. She shared her food with those who had less. She helped the most debilitated get dressed. She sang old songs to calm those suffering from dementia. But inside, her heart broke a little more each day. And then came the inspections. The Health and Safety Executive and the Crown Prosecution Service received anonymous complaints about the shelter's conditions. When the inspectors arrived, they found a scene of horror: overcrowding, lack of hygiene, sick seniors without medical care, spoiled food in the kitchen, sewage leaks. The shelter was immediately shut down. All residents would need to be relocated. But the public system was saturated. Other shelters had no vacancies. Relatives were contacted when possible. And for those without family, without documents, without anyone, the solution was cruel. They were simply released. Mrs. Louise found herself on the street with only the clothes on her back and a plastic bag with her most basic belongings. She had no money, no documents, nowhere to go. She tried to return to the apartment where she lived before, but the doorman didn't recognize her. In those months at the shelter, she had lost a lot of weight. Her hair was white and disheveled, her clothes were different. The doorman chased her away, thinking she was a beggar. For the first time in her life, Mrs. Louise knew real hunger. The hunger that aches in the stomach, that steals sleep, that makes the head spin. She learned where the community soup kitchens were, the places that distributed food to homeless people. She learned to rummage through trash, looking for still edible scraps and recyclable materials to sell. She slept wherever she could, under awnings, in parks, in the corridors of subway stations when security allowed. She needed to take blood pressure medicine, but the money she got from recycling barely covered food. Many days she chose between eating or buying the pills. Her health deteriorated rapidly, but even on the street, even in the most absolute misery, Mrs. Louise did not lose her essence. When she managed an extra piece of bread, she shared it with another homeless person. When someone was sick, she stayed by their side, caring for them. When a young woman, also homeless, was attacked, Mrs. Louise defended and sheltered her. She became known among the homeless population in the city centre. They called her Mrs. Lou, the kind-hearted old lady who always had a comforting word, even when she herself was suffering. She made improbable friends. A former lawyer who had lost everything due to chemical dependency, a teenager who ran away from home to escape a violent situation, a man who had been an engineer and now lived by begging at traffic lights. Everyone had stories, everyone had had lives before falling onto the streets, and everyone, in some way, found a little humanity in Mrs. Louise's tired but still kind eyes. Meanwhile, she never gave up trying to contact her son. She asked to use strangers' phones on the streets, but the numbers she dialed always went busy or straight to voicemail. She tried to send messages through acquaintances who still had internet access. She tried to go to Richard's company building, but security prevented her from entering, treating her like any madwoman. And Richard, immersed in his successful life, firmly believed his mother was well cared for. Michelle's messages were so convincing, the reports so detailed. How could he suspect? How could he imagine that every penny he sent to care for his mother was being diverted to his consultant's international bank accounts? When Mrs. Louise finished telling her story, the sun was already high in the sky. Richard had listened to every word in silence, holding her hand, tears streaming freely down his face. The anger he felt was so intense it was physical, burning in his chest like fire. "I'm going to destroy her, Mum. I'm going to make her pay for every second of suffering she caused." Mrs. Louise squeezed his hand more tightly. "Don't do it for revenge, son. Do it for justice. And most importantly, do it so this doesn't happen to other people." Richard nodded, admired once again by his mother's wisdom and generosity. Even after everything, she wasn't just thinking about herself. She was thinking about others who might be suffering the same. That same day, still at the hospital, Richard called his lawyer. Mark Thompson was one of London's best criminal lawyers, an old friend from university days. When Richard briefly told him what had happened, Mark was shocked. "I'm coming over now. Don't do anything before I get there. Nothing. Don't try to contact Michelle. Leave it to me." Mark arrived 2 hours later, accompanied by his team. They set up a meticulous operation. First, they gained access to all the contracts Richard had signed. These were documents drafted with extreme cunning. Michelle had legally protected herself in several places, but there were also loopholes, trails that could be followed. Private investigators began to work. In 3 days, they discovered that the Greenfields residence never existed. The address on the contracts led to an empty lot. The photos Michelle showed were of a resort in the Cotswolds, but which had no relation to elder care. It was just a tourist hotel. They traced the bank transfers. Richard had sent over £3 million over the months. The money went into an account in the name of a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. From there, it was distributed to several different accounts. Investigators found records of the purchase of a luxury apartment in Chelsea Harbour, an imported car, foreign financial investments. Michelle had built a sophisticated money laundering network, and it wasn't the first time. Investigators discovered that she had done this before with another client, a real estate businessman who had also trusted her. In that case, the amount diverted was smaller, and the businessman preferred not to report it to avoid public scandal. But Richard was not interested in hiding anything. He wanted justice. He wanted Michelle to pay. He wanted the story to become public to warn others. Mark prepared a comprehensive complaint: fraud, document forgery, embezzlement, elder abuse, criminal conspiracy. The list of crimes was extensive. With all the evidence gathered, he personally went to the National Crime Agency to deliver the material. Michelle's arrest happened on a Thursday morning. She was in her luxury apartment in Chelsea Harbour, the same one she had bought with the money diverted from Richard. Images of the operation were broadcast live by major news channels. Michelle Brennan, the famous image consultant for businessmen, being led away in handcuffs. In the reports, all the details of the scheme came to light. The media turned the case into one of the biggest scandals of the year. Mrs. Louise's story moved the entire country. A 74-year-old lady, abandoned through fraud while her son believed she was well cared for. Richard gave a press conference. Wearing simple clothes, without his usual corporate elegance, he confessed everything. He didn't try to victimize himself. He admitted he had been negligent, that he had trusted too much, that he had prioritized his career over his mother. "I am also guilty. I signed contracts without reading them. I trusted blindly. I didn't visit my mother when I should have. I was complicit in my own abandonment disguised as care. And now I will dedicate the rest of my life to repairing this error and ensuring that other families don't go through the same thing." The repercussion was immediate and massive. Thousands of comments on social media. Similar stories began to emerge. Children who had abandoned parents in institutions without ever visiting them again. Seniors forgotten in precarious care homes. Cases of fraud and abuse. The entire society was forced to look at a problem it usually preferred to ignore: elder abandonment. And at the center of this national discussion was Mrs. Louise, the simple woman who had survived the worst and still maintained her dignity and kindness intact. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Mrs. Louise began to recover slowly. The doctors were impressed by her willpower. The pneumonia was being treated, the wounds were healing, her blood pressure was stabilizing. But more important than the physical recovery was seeing the sparkle returning to her eyes. Seeing Richard by her side every day, holding her hand, talking, caring for her, as he should have done all along. The 2 weeks Mrs. Louise spent hospitalized at the London clinic were a watershed moment in Richard Adams' life. He cancelled all appointments, all trips, all meetings. He delegated the company's management to his trusted partner and practically moved into the hospital room. He slept in an armchair beside his mother's bed, waking with every movement she made, every sigh, every time she called for water or simply needed to know he was there. It was as if the roles had been reversed. Now it was he who cared, who fed, who ensured she took her medicine at the right times. He exchanged conversations with nurses about her clinical progress, discussed the best treatments with doctors, followed every test as if his own life depended on those results. And in a way it did, because Richard was discovering that without his mother, without that genuine connection, without that unconditional love that only a mother can give, all the success in the world meant absolutely nothing. During the days in the hospital, they talked as they hadn't in years, not about business, not about professional achievements, but about life, about childhood memories Richard had forgotten, about the time they lived in that simple house in the East End, when he woke up to the smell of filtered coffee and grilled bread that Mrs. Louise prepared before leaving for work, about the Sundays when they went together to the open-air market and she haggled with the vendors to get the best prices, about the night he passed his university entrance exam and she cried with happiness, saying that all the sacrifices had been worth it. "Mum, I'm so sorry." Richard repeated this several times a day, like a mantra that needed to be said to perhaps one day be forgiven. "I'm so sorry for letting this happen, for drifting away, for choosing my career over you." Mrs. Louise always responded with the same gentleness that characterized her. "Son, you had no way of knowing. That woman deceived you. She deceived me too. But I should have suspected. I should have visited. I should have. Should have. Mrs. Louise interrupted with a tired but sincere smile. Life isn't lived in the should-haves, Richard. It's lived in what we do from now on. And you are here now. That's what matters. Those words, spoken with the simple wisdom of someone who had lived much and suffered even more, touched Richard deeply. His mother wasn't interested in endless remorse. She was interested in reconstruction, in moving forward, in transforming all that pain into something meaningful. It was in those hospital conversations, between doctors' visits and IV changes, that the idea for the foundation was born. Richard was talking about how he wanted to do something to prevent other families from going through the same thing, when Mrs. Louise held his hand and said something that would change everything. "Then do it, son. But don't just do it for me. Do it for all those I met on the streets. For Mr. Oswald, who was a teacher and now sleeps on cardboard. For Joyce, that 19-year-old girl who has nowhere to go. For Mark, who worked 30 years as an engineer and now begs in Trafalgar Square. They also have stories. They also deserve dignity." And so, in room 512 of the London Clinic, the Louise Adams Foundation was born. It wouldn't be just any institution, created solely to clean up the image of a repentant businessman. It would be a serious, well-structured organization with a real focus on solving real problems for real people. Richard hired a team of consultants specialized in the non-profit sector. But before any strategic planning, before any board meeting, he did something no consultant had suggested. He went to the streets to talk to those who truly understood the matter. Accompanied only by a social worker named Paul, who had worked for 15 years with homeless populations, Richard spent 3 nights touring the central areas of London, not as a businessman, not as a philanthropist, but as someone genuinely interested in listening. He spoke with dozens of people. He heard heartbreaking stories. He met Mr. Oswald, the former teacher Mrs. Louise had mentioned, a 68-year-old man, cultured, articulate, who had lost everything after a messy divorce and a consuming depression. He now lived under a flyover, surrounded by books he collected from the trash and read by candlelight. He met Joyce, the 19-year-old girl who fled a violent home and now prostituted herself to survive, despite having studied at a technical school and dreaming of becoming a nurse. He met Mark, the retired engineer who had invested all his savings in a business that failed and, without being able to pay rent, ended up on the streets. He met Mrs. Mary Dolores, an 80-year-old lady who had been evicted when she could no longer pay rent and now slept at the door of a church. Each story was a punch to Richard's gut. But more than that, each story was a lesson about resilience, about dignity maintained even in the worst circumstances, about humanity that persists despite everything. And everyone knew Mrs. Louise. Everyone had something good to say about her. "Mrs. Lou gave me food when I was starving," Joyce said, her eyes welling up. "She shared the little she had, and she always treated us with respect, you know, like real people, not like trash. She took care of me when I had a high fever," said Mr. Oswald. "She stayed awake for 2 days giving me water, making me compresses. She saved my life." Richard listened to each testimony with tears in his eyes. His mother, even at rock bottom, had been a light for other people, and now it was his turn to be light too. When Mrs. Louise was discharged from the hospital, Richard didn't take her back to the apartment he had bought for her years ago. Instead, he had a surprise. During the 2 weeks of hospitalization, he had bought back the house where they grew up, the same simple brick house in the east, and it had been abandoned for years, but Richard completely renovated it. He kept the original structure, the memories on the walls, but modernized everything. Accessibility for seniors, a ground-floor bedroom so Mrs. Louise wouldn't need to climb stairs, an adapted bathroom, a large and airy kitchen. When she entered the house and recognized where she was, Mrs. Louise simply collapsed in tears. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of someone who had finally returned home. "My little house," she whispered, running her hand over the walls as if caressing a child. "My little house that I loved so much." Richard hired a nurse to live with them, not a stranger but someone Mrs. Louise chose, Nurse Patricia, a 50-year-old widow who worked at the hospital and had cared for Mrs. Louise with such affection during her hospitalization that they formed a genuine bond. Patricia accepted the invitation not only for the salary, but because she had also grown fond of that very special lady. And Richard. Richard literally moved into the house too. He kept his apartment in Mayfair for eventualities, but his home became there in that simple house beside his mother. He transformed one of the rooms into an office and began to work from home whenever possible. Every Sunday became sacred. It was the day Richard and Mrs. Louise cooked together. She taught old recipes he learned with the patience of someone who truly wants to learn, not just do a therapeutic activity. They made that chicken stroganoff that was his favorite as a child. They made cornmeal cake, cheese bread, and cart driver's rice, arroz carretero, and they ate together at the kitchen table, talking about everything and nothing, making up for lost time. Meanwhile, the Louise Adams Foundation took shape. Richard invested £5 million initially, and the money recovered from Michelle's fraud. But more important than the money was the philosophy that guided the foundation. Nothing about us without us. This became the motto. It meant that any decision on how to help homeless people or abandoned seniors would be made with the participation of those same people. It wouldn't be experts in offices deciding what was best. It would be the affected people themselves having an active voice. Richard hired Mr. Oswald as a pedagogical consultant. Joyce joined the social work team after the foundation sponsored her return to nursing studies. Mark became responsible for the engineering and infrastructure part of the housing projects. Mrs. Mary Dolores became a kind of ambassador for the foundation, visiting shelters and talking to other seniors about their rights. The foundation's first action was to create an elderly care home inspection program. Teams made up of social workers, health professionals, and, crucially, former residents of precarious care homes made surprise visits to public and private institutions. They evaluated sanitary conditions, resident treatment, food quality, access to medication, and medical care. Care homes that were in an irregular situation were notified. If they didn't improve, they were reported. The foundation maintained a direct channel with the Crown Prosecution Service and the Health and Safety Executive. In 6 months, 15 care homes were closed due to inadequate conditions. But the foundation didn't just report. It also helped with the appropriate relocation of the elderly, ensuring they went to dignified places or, when possible, back to their families. The second action was to create specialized reception centers. They weren't traditional shelters. They were transitional spaces where homeless people could take a shower, change clothes, receive basic medical care, have meals, and have access to social workers and psychologists. But most importantly, they were listening spaces, where each person was heard, their story was valued, their dreams were considered. The first centre was inaugurated in central London near Trafalgar Square. Richard made sure his mother cut the inaugural ribbon. Mrs. Louise, still fragile but with a new sparkle in her eyes, was surrounded by her friends from the streets. All now clean, well-dressed, but still being who they always were. "This place is for you," she said with an emotional voice, "so that no one else has to live what we lived, so that everyone is treated with the dignity they deserve." The centre was an immediate success. It served an average of 150 people a day. It offered not only emergency assistance, but also professional training courses, help to get documents, support to find work and housing. In 1 year, over 400 people managed to get off the streets through the program. The third major action was the creation of permanent housing for seniors. The foundation bought a plot of land in the East End and built a housing complex. These weren't collective asylum rooms. They were small individual apartments, 40 square meters, each with a bedroom, living room, kitchen and bathroom. Each senior had their own space, their privacy, their dignity. But at the same time, the complex had common areas, a central square with a garden, a common room, a library, a craft studio, a community garden. Residents could be independent, but also be part of a community. The complex was inaugurated 1.5 years after Richard's reunion with Mrs. Louise. The ceremony was attended by authorities, the press, donors, but mainly the first 50 residents, all seniors rescued from situations of abandonment or homelessness. Each apartment had been furnished with donations and purchases from the foundation. A comfortable bed, stove, refrigerator, television, all new, all designed to provide comfort and autonomy. And on each door, a plaque with the resident's name. It was no longer so-and-so from room 23. It was Mr. Joseph with his apartment, Mrs. Celia with her house, Mr. Anthony with his home. Richard gave an emotional speech at the inauguration. "My mother taught me that dignity is not given. It is recognized. Every person here has always had dignity, even when society didn't recognize it. This place is not charity. It is justice. It is the least we can do for those who built this country and were then forgotten." Applause echoed, but the most moving moment came when Mrs. Louise stepped onto the improvised stage. She had not prepared any speech. She simply began to speak from the heart. "I lived on the streets. I rummaged through trash. I slept on the cold ground. I felt hunger. I felt pain. I felt abandonment. But I never lost hope that things could get better, and you can't lose it either." She looked at each of the new residents. "We are more than our age. We are more than our difficulties. We are human beings with stories, with dreams, with the right to a good life until the last day." There wasn't a dry eye at that event. Even the most cynical journalists were moved. The story was being broadcast live on television, and social media exploded with messages of support and emotion. The case gained national repercussion. Other businessmen began to donate to the foundation. Companies offered partnerships. Volunteers wanted to help. In less than 2 years, the Louise Adams Foundation was operating in 5 regions of the UK, with projects in 15 different cities. But success does not mean absence of challenges. Richard quickly learned that changing ingrained systems of neglect and abandonment was a constant battle. He faced resistance from corrupt politicians who profited from precarious care homes through fraudulent tenders. He faced bureaucracy from public bodies that hindered licenses and approvals. He faced society's prejudice that still saw homeless people as responsible for their own condition. But Richard did not give up. Every time he encountered an obstacle, he remembered his mother rummaging through that trash. He remembered her eyes when she recognized him that night. He remembered that if she could survive hell and still maintain her kindness, he could face any challenge. The foundation began to influence public policies. Richard, now with credibility not only as a businessman but as a social activist, was invited to participate in municipal and regional councils on elder rights and homeless populations. His proposals were always practical, based on real experience, not on academic theories distant from reality. He proposed and managed to approve a municipal law that required every elderly care home, public or private, to be inspected quarterly by an independent team that included representatives from human rights organizations. He proposed a subsidy program for low-income families who wanted to care for their elderly at home instead of institutionalizing them. He proposed the creation of priority spots in housing programs for homeless seniors. Not all proposals were approved. Politics is slow, bureaucratic, full of conflicting interests. But every small victory was celebrated, and when there were defeats, Richard learned and returned with new strategies. Meanwhile, the legal process against Michelle Brennan continued its course. The defense lawyers tried everything. They claimed she merely managed the money according to Richard's instructions. They tried to discredit Mrs. Louise, suggesting she had mental problems and had invented the whole story. They tried to turn Michelle into a victim of a system that pressured her to impossible results. But the evidence was overwhelming. Forged documents, testimonies from employees who helped with the scheme, bank records that clearly showed the diversion of funds, even text messages where Michelle arranged details of the fraud with her accomplices. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Mrs. Louise was called to testify. Richard was worried about the emotional impact this could have on her, but his mother was firm. "I need to do this, son. Not just for me, but for all the people that woman may have deceived before and may deceive in the future." On the day of the testimony, Mrs. Louise entered the courtroom with her head held high. She wore simple but dignified clothes. She didn't try to evoke pity. She simply told the truth with the calm and clear voice of someone who has nothing to hide and nothing to prove. Michelle was sitting in the defendant's box, with that elegant posture that always characterized her. But when she looked at Mrs. Louise, something in her face changed. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps it was just the weight of reality finally catching up with her. When the judge asked Mrs. Louise what she expected as a result of that trial, she responded something no one expected. I hope for justice, but I don't confuse justice with revenge. That young woman caused me a lot of suffering. She caused suffering to my son, but I also hope she learns that one day she leaves that place as a different person, because in the end, Your Honor, we all deserve a second chance, even those who took our first one. The courtroom fell silent. It was a demonstration of humanity so profound that even the most cynical present were touched. Michelle lowered her head, and for the first time since the beginning of the process, tears streamed down her perfectly made-up face. The verdict came 2 weeks later. Michelle Brennan was found guilty of all crimes: aggravated fraud, ideological falsification, embezzlement, elder abuse, and criminal conspiracy. The sentence was 12 years in closed prison, with no possibility of parole in the first 5 years. Richard was present when the sentence was read. He felt no joy. He felt no satisfied revenge. He felt only a relief that that chapter was finally closed and that now they could move on completely. 5 years had passed since that night that changed everything. 5 years since the reunion in the alley. 5 years of profound transformations, not only in the lives of Richard and Mrs. Louise, but in the lives of thousands of people who were touched directly or indirectly by the work of the Louise Adams Foundation. That Saturday morning in September, Richard woke up early as he always did now, no longer from the urgency of business commitments, but from the simple pleasure of enjoying every moment of the day. He went down to the kitchen of the house in the East End and found his mother already awake preparing coffee. She was 79 years old now, her completely white hair always neatly styled in a soft bun, her face still marked by the wrinkles life had given her, but with that special sparkle in her eyes of someone who had found purpose. "Good morning, Mum." Richard kissed the top of her head. "Good morning, son. Today is an important day, isn't it?" "It is," Richard smiled. "Very important." It was the day of the inauguration of the Foundation's 10th housing complex, this one in Liverpool. In addition, Richard had been invited to give a lecture at the graduation ceremony of University College London, UCL, one of the country's most prestigious universities. The invitation came from the rector herself, who knew Richard's story and believed the graduates could learn a lot from him. But before any event, Richard had a ritual he religiously kept every Saturday. He visited the Foundation's projects in the city, talked to the beneficiaries, listened to their stories, their difficulties, their achievements. He was no longer the distant businessman who managed everything from afar. Through reports, he was someone who truly understood up close the impact of the work they were doing. That Saturday, he went to the Trafalgar Square reception centre, the first one they had inaugurated. He arrived unannounced, as he always did. He didn't want special treatment. He wanted to see how things really worked when no one was expecting the founder. He found Mr. Oswald working. The former teacher now coordinated the education sector of the centre, offering literacy classes and tutoring for homeless youth. He was in a small room adapted as a classroom, surrounded by 6 young people, between 15 and 20 years old, all attentive as he explained basic math concepts on the whiteboard. Richard observed through the glass door, without interrupting. He saw the passion on Mr. Oswald's face, the dedication in every gesture, the care with which he corrected the students' errors without making them feel stupid or incapable. That man who had almost died on the streets was now saving other lives through education. When the class ended, Mr. Oswald came to greet him. "Richard, my boy, I didn't know you were coming today. I like to show up by surprise, Mr. Oswald." "You know that? How are the students?" The teacher's aged face lit up. "Wonderful, Richard. Wonderful. Jonas there, the one in the blue shirt, is studying for his A-levels. He wants to go to university to study engineering. And you know what's most beautiful? He was on the streets 3 years ago. Today he has housing, works part-time in a mechanical workshop, and studies at night here at the centre. That's the kind of story that makes me wake up every day, Mr. Oswald. And it's not just him. We have 23 young people who managed to return to regular school. Through the programme, 15 who are already working with signed contracts, and most importantly, Richard, they have regained hope. That's priceless." Richard spent the entire morning touring the different sectors of the centre. He visited the medical clinic, where Nurse Patricia now coordinated a team of 4 professionals who attended cases ranging from simple wounds to more serious emergencies, always referring to hospitals when necessary. He visited the kitchen, where Mrs. Mary Dolores supervised the preparation of daily meals that fed an average of 200 people. He visited the social assistance sector, where Joyce, already a qualified nurse but having discovered a vocation for social work, helped people obtain documents, search for family members, and find job opportunities. Every person Richard met had a story of overcoming adversity. And many of these stories had started exactly in that center, in that space that he and his mother had dreamed of together in the hospital days. In the afternoon, Richard returned home to have lunch with Mrs. Louise before they traveled together to Liverpool the next day. As they ate the pasta she had prepared, they talked about the 5 years that had passed. Sometimes it seems like a dream. "Mum?" Richard drank wine while she preferred her passion fruit juice. "I remember you in that alley, and it still seems impossible that all this has happened." Mrs. Louise put down her fork and looked at her son with that serious expression she used when she wanted to say something important. "Do you know what I learned all these years, Richard? That rock bottom can be the beginning of a ladder. I hit rock bottom, you too, in your own way, when you realized what you had allowed to happen. But the difference between staying down there and climbing up is the choice we make after the fall. And you really forgave me, Mum, after everything. Son, I forgave you the exact moment I saw you that night. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing not to let resentment consume you. It means understanding that people make mistakes and that genuine repentance deserves a second chance. But I don't deserve forgiveness so easily. Mrs. Louise interrupted, placing her hand over his. "It wasn't easy, Richard. There were nights I cried alone in my room here. There were times when the pain returned, when the feeling of abandonment squeezed my chest. But then I looked around and saw everything you were doing. Not out of obligation, not to clear your conscience, but because you truly changed. And when I saw that my son had transformed into a better man than he already was, forgiveness stopped being difficult and became natural." They were silent for a moment, just holding each other's hands across the table. "Do you know what makes me most proud, son? It's not the foundation. It's not the awards you won. It's not the recognition. It's seeing that you regained your humanity, that you became that good-hearted boy I raised, only now with resources to make a difference." Richard felt his eyes well up. Even after 5 years, certain conversations still deeply moved him. "Everything good I learned from you, Mum," Mrs. Louise smiled. "Then I did my job well." That night, Richard reviewed the speech he would give at the UCL graduation the next day. He had written and rewritten it several times, wanting to find the right words. He didn't want to sound like cheap self-help. He didn't want to seem like he was promoting himself. He wanted to be genuine, vulnerable, honest. Mrs. Louise entered his office with a cup of tea. "Still working on the speech?" "I am. I want it to be special." She sat in the chair opposite his desk. "Want my opinion?" "Always. Don't try to be perfect, Richard. Tell the truth. Tell your true story with the mistakes and all. Young people don't need flawless heroes. They need real examples of people who fell and got back up. That's what inspires." Richard smiled. His mother always knew exactly what to say. "You're right, Mum, as always." On Sunday night, Richard and Mrs. Louise arrived in Liverpool. The inauguration would be Monday morning. They stayed in a simple hotel, none of the 5-star establishments Richard usually frequented on his business trips. He had learned that excessive comfort distanced him from the reality of the people the foundation served. The inauguration ceremony of the housing complex in Liverpool was emotional. It was the largest they had built so far, with 100 individual apartments for seniors. Each unit had been customized according to the needs and preferences of its resident. Mrs. Joanna, an 82-year-old lady who had spent 4 years on the streets, wanted a large kitchen because she loved to cook. Mr. Manuel, a 77-year-old widower, had asked for a small workshop in the back because he enjoyed carpentry. Mrs. Conception, 69, wanted many plants, so her apartment had a spacious balcony facing the sun. When the residents received the keys, the emotion was collective. Many cried. Some couldn't believe it was real, that they would finally have a place to call their own. Mrs. Joanna hugged Mrs. Louise and said something that summarized everyone's feeling. "You gave me back my dignity. Now I am a person again." Mrs. Louise, with tears in her eyes, replied, "You always were a person, dear. Sometimes society just needs to be reminded of that." After the inauguration, Richard gave several interviews. Local and national media were present, documenting another achievement of the foundation. But Richard didn't speak as a businessman or celebrity. He spoke as a son, as someone who had learned the hard way the value of not abandoning those we love. "This foundation exists because I failed as a son," he said in an interview with the city's main newspaper. "I failed in such a devastating way that my own mother ended up on the streets, while I believed she was well cared for. But from that failure a purpose was born, and that purpose is to ensure that no other family has to go through what we went through." The reporter asked about Michelle, about her imprisonment, about whether Richard felt justice had been served. "Justice was served in the legal sense, yes, she is serving her sentence. But true justice for me lies in every senior we rescue from the streets, in every life we transform. That's what truly matters." "And what about the future of the foundation?" Richard looked at Mrs. Louise, who was by his side. "The future is to continue growing, but growing with quality. We don't want to be the largest foundation in the UK. We want to be the best. We want every person served to be truly helped, not just a statistic in a report. And my mother, who is the soul of this project, will continue to be our guide. She lived what most of us only know through statistics. She knows what these people need because she was one of them." On Tuesday, back in London, the day of the UCL graduation speech arrived. The auditorium was packed with over 1,000 graduates, as well as family members, professors and academic authorities. Richard was nervous, as he hadn't been in years. It wasn't fear of public speaking. He mastered that perfectly. It was the weight of responsibility to say something truly meaningful to those young people who were about to enter the professional world. Mrs. Louise was in the front row, alongside Mr. Oswald, Joyce, Mark, Mrs. Mary Dolores, and Nurse Patricia. The entire family they had built together over these 5 years. When Richard stepped onto the stage, he received a standing ovation before he even began to speak. His story was known to everyone there. He waited for silence to return, took a deep breath, and began. "Rector, professors, family members, but most importantly, you, graduates. I am here today not as the successful businessman I once was. I am here as someone who lost everything that truly mattered while I thought I was gaining the world." He told his story. He didn't spare details of his mistakes. He spoke about how he allowed himself to be consumed by ambition, about how he trusted blindly in someone who didn't deserve trust, about how he abandoned his mother disguised as care, about that night in the alley that changed everything. "You will leave here with diplomas in the best fields. You will have incredible opportunities. Some of you will be very successful, and that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be successful. The error lies in thinking that success is measured only by money, power, or recognition. True success is measured by the human connections we cultivate, by the positive difference we make in people's lives, by how faithful we remain to our values even when the pressure is great to abandon them." He paused, looking directly at the young faces before him. "My mother was rummaging through trash meters away from the charity event where I was lecturing on human dignity. Think of the irony. Think of the tragedy. Think of how easy it is for us to become hypocrites when we separate our personal lives from our declared values." Richard pointed to Mrs. Louise in the front row. "That lady there taught me more in the 5 years since our reunion than all the MBAs in the world could teach. She taught me that dignity is not lost even when everything else is lost. That kindness is not a luxury for those who are well, but a choice for those who decide to remain human even in the worst circumstances. That forgiveness is not weakness, but the most powerful strength that exists." He saw several graduates wiping away tears. He saw emotional professors. He saw the rector with tears in her eyes. "So, my message to you is simple. Don't sacrifice the people you love on the altar of success. Don't ignore those who need help just because it's inconvenient or unprofitable. Don't let the corporate world, with all its pressures and demands, transform you into people your parents wouldn't recognize. He took a deep breath for the final sentence. And if you make mistakes, because we all do, have the courage to acknowledge them, to ask for forgiveness, and to change. It's never too late to do what's right. It's never too late to reclaim your humanity. It's never too late to rekindle the light of dignity. The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds before exploding into an ovation that lasted 5 full minutes. Graduates stood up, cheered, applauded. Some cried openly. Professors came to congratulate him. The rector hugged him, saying that had been the best graduation speech in the university's history. But the most important moment for Richard was when he descended from the stage and found his mother. She hugged him tightly. In that way, mothers hug their children regardless of age. "You spoke beautifully, son. You spoke from the heart. Your father would be proud." It was the first time in years she had mentioned Richard's father, a man he never knew, and about whom she rarely spoke. Richard pulled back slightly from the hug to look into her eyes. He would be proud? Mrs. Louise smiled through her tears. He would, because you became the man I always dreamed you would be. Not for being rich or famous, but for being good. That night, Richard posted a simple video on his social media. He and Mrs. Louise in the kitchen of the house, preparing that chicken stroganoff. She teaching, he learning, both laughing at some inside joke. The caption was equally simple. 5 years ago, I found my mother rummaging through trash. Today we cook together every Sunday. There is no greater success than that. The video went viral. In 2 days, it had over 20 million views. Thousands of comments from people saying that the video inspired them to call their mothers, visit their fathers, reconnect with family members they had neglected. Stories of reconciliation began to emerge. Children who started talking to parents again, siblings who reconnected, families who reunited. One comment in particular touched Richard. It was from a woman named Sandra from Manchester. "My father has been in a care home for 3 years. I pay the monthly fee religiously but never visit because it's far and my life is busy. After seeing this video, I realized I'm doing exactly what Richard did. Tomorrow I'm going to pick him up. He's going to live with me. Thank you for waking me up." Richard showed the comment to Mrs. Louise. She read it, smiled, and said, "See, son, a mistake turned into a lesson for the whole world. That's true transformation." In the following months, the Louise Adams Foundation continued to expand. It opened 3 more reception centers and 2 housing complexes. It launched a professional training program specifically for people over 50 who were unemployed, recognizing that ageism was one of the causes of many seniors ending up in vulnerable situations. It also created the Reconnection program, focused on reuniting separated families. Many homeless seniors had children who had simply lost contact, whether due to pride, shame, or life circumstances. The foundation began to act as a mediator, facilitating these reunions when possible and desired by both parties. Richard drastically reduced his business activities. He appointed a CEO to manage the day-to-day of Adams Tech, and now acted only as chairman of the board, participating in strategic decisions, but not in daily management. His main focus now was the foundation, and especially his mother. Every Sunday remained sacred. They cooked together, talked, sometimes just sat in silence next to each other watching television or reading. Richard discovered that he didn't always have to be doing something grand. Sometimes simply being present was grand enough. Mrs. Louise, at 79 years old, had become a respected public figure. She was invited to give lectures, participate in television programs, write articles on dignity in old age. But she remained humble, always remembering where she came from and why she was there. In an interview for a national television program, the presenter asked if she could completely forgive Richard for what happened. "Yes, I forgave him. But do you know why? Because he gave me the greatest proof of love a son can give a mother. He changed. He didn't just apologize, he transformed himself. And what's more, he transformed that pain into something that helps thousands of people. How could I not forgive him? And Michelle, do you forgive her too?" Mrs. Louise thought for a moment before answering, "I'm on the way. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip and it's done. It's a process. There are days when the anger returns, when I remember what she did and I get upset. But there are days when I can think of her as a human being who made terrible mistakes and is now paying for it. I hope that when she leaves prison, she will be a different person. I hope she has learned. And if one day she wants to apologize personally, I will listen, because that's the kind of person I want to be. The interview moved millions of viewers. Mrs. Louise became a symbol not only of overcoming adversity, but of genuine forgiveness and compassion. Richard, meanwhile, became a reference in corporate social responsibility. He was constantly invited to speak about how businessmen can use their resources for social causes effectively and not just as marketing. His message was always the same: start at home, take care of those close to you, don't neglect the basics in search of the extraordinary. In one of his most striking lectures, he said something that became his most famous phrase: I was capable of donating £100,000 to a social project while my own mother was rummaging through trash. That's not generosity. It's hypocrisy. True social change begins when we treat our own families, our own employees, our own neighbors with the same dignity we claim to want for the world. The Louise Adams Foundation celebrated its 5th anniversary with impressive numbers. It had directly helped over 8,000 people out of homelessness. It had inspected over 300 care homes, resulting in the closure of 63 due to inadequate conditions and the improvement of another 120. It had built 7 permanent housing complexes totaling 450 units. It operated 15 reception centers in 9 regions. But more important than the numbers were the stories. Each person served had a story of transformation. And these stories, shared in videos, posts, and interviews, inspired others to make a difference in their own communities. At the 5-year anniversary celebration, held at the first housing complex they had inaugurated, everyone who had been part of this journey was present. Mr. Oswald, Joyce, Mark, Mrs. Mary Dolores, Nurse Patricia, but also dozens of people who had been helped and were now volunteers or employees of the foundation, people who transformed their pain into purpose. Richard gave a brief speech thanking everyone, and then he invited his mother to speak. Mrs. Louise stepped onto the small stage set up in the central square of the complex, leaning slightly on Richard. She looked at all the people gathered and smiled. 5 years ago, I was on the streets. I had nothing, but I never lost one thing: hope. Hope that things could get better, that there was still goodness in the world, that my son would find me, and he did. But more than that, he found himself. And together we found a purpose greater than ourselves. She paused, emotional. Each of you here represents a second chance, a new story, a light at the end of the tunnel, and I want you to know that you are valuable, that your lives matter, that the world is better with you in it. Never forget that. Applause echoed through the square, and as Richard hugged his mother on that improvised stage, he knew with absolute certainty that he had made peace with his past and built a future of which he could be genuinely proud. Today, the story of Richard and Mrs. Louise is studied in universities as an example of social transformation through personal experience. Their case influenced changes in legislation on elder protection in several regions. The Louise Adams Foundation became a model for other similar organizations, but for Richard and Mrs. Louise, what truly matters are not the awards, the recognitions, or the statistics. What matters are the Sundays in the kitchen, the hugs before bed, the simple conversations about nothing and everything at the same time, the glances that say more than 1,000 words. It is the certainty that, despite everything that happened, despite all the pain and suffering, they found their way back to each other, and on that path they illuminated the path of thousands of other people. The story of this woman and her son became a symbol that it's never too late to do what's right, that even in the deepest darkness, it's still possible to rekindle the light of dignity. That true love is not that which never errs, but that which has the courage to recognize its mistakes, ask for forgiveness and change. And every time someone asks Richard what his greatest achievement in life is, he doesn't talk about his technology company. He doesn't talk about the millions he earned. He doesn't talk about the awards he received. He simply answers, I found my mother again, and she forgave me. There is no greater achievement than that.